My name's Ben Birchall. I'm a writer and broadcaster, and this is the point that I kind of make my confession that I've also been an advertising creative for 10 years. So
he has no soul.
Yeah. Literally, I walk past mirrors and there's no reflection. So I guess that qualifies me somewhat for today's conversation. I guess political advertising is often seen as a bit of a dark art perpetrated by shadowy figures in order to dupe voters. And in Dee Madigan's The Hard Sell, she sheds some light on this dark artistry, and it's made all the more insightful by the fact that she is one of these shadowy figures lurking in the corners of politics. So please welcome today Advertising Creative Director, writer and commentator Dee Madigan.
Thanks.
So, Dee, I do want to get some of your thoughts on the current Victorian state election campaign that's going on at the moment. But to start with The Hard Sell, which is a great read, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on how much trouble you get into by giving away all of the trade secrets. But I guess my first question is, how does political advertising differ from sort of conventional advertising as far as your approach to it?
Usually you've got less time. With brands, as you would know, it's something usually you advertise over years and you build brands gradually. Politics, unfortunately, tend to ignore any communication with the consumer until 6 weeks before an election. Then it all goes into a panic and it's like, oh, we've got to sell ourselves. Like, you might want to start a little earlier. But so that's one of the differences. But also it's about selling it's more like social marketing, which is about changing behaviours rather than just buying something. But having said that, choosing to vote is actually a purchasing decision anyway, and it's usually a grudge one, particularly at the moment. You know, it's which party do I hate least. But it still is a purchasing decision.
So you talk a bit about the sort of the brand of political parties in The Hard Sell. How difficult is it to communicate a brand that doesn't know itself?
Well, it is impossible, and a lot of people within politics hate it when you talk about themselves as a brand, because they think that the brand is about the selling of the product, and it isn't. If you actually understand branding is who you stand, it's what you stand for and who you are. But equally, it's about how that message is taken by the consumer. So someone once described a brand, a good brand, as a promise kept. So it's not what you're putting out, it's as much as what's been taken in. And so a good political brand, people actually should know what it is you stand for and what you say, whereas I think political parties think, oh, we need to, do a logo and do a strapline and that's our branding, and it's not. Unless you start internally and work out what the hell it is, who you are, and particularly and I'm talking probably at the Labor Party here who's struggled the most with it, and one of the reasons is because the brand itself has changed. Like the Labor Party, when it first started, was the Socialist Workers' Party, and over the years that's actually almost broken up into two separate elements, which is sort of the workers, and the socialists have become the progressive. Like 80 years ago, the most progressive elements of our society were the workers. Now, the workers are often the most conservative, and so you've got a Labor Party that needs to speak to two very different groups. And then within the Labor Party, you then have the factions which have split up accordingly into the left and right, and trying to sort of reach a target audience when you've got a brand with quite different messages and different target audiences is really difficult. But that's not to say it's not possible, because if you think about John Howard's, in the 90s, he managed to sort of Howard's battlers. Now, they were Labor Party voters, and somehow he made them sort of feel like the Liberal Party brand, which is a conservative brand. And the only reason you vote Conservative is when you've got something you want to conserve. But they managed to make this brand relevant to basically the Labor Party target market. So you can widen who your brand appeals to. You just have to be really careful how you do it. And the carbon tax, for example, was how the Liberal Party nearly split the Labor Party, because they framed the carbon tax as an anti-worker policy. It would cost jobs. Whereas if it had been framed properly, you could have got it through there, but they literally used that to sort of split the party down the middle in terms of ideology. And it didn't help, of course, that we shelved the greatest moral challenge of our time. That sort of never helps you sell something anyway.
So you've got with the example of the 2013 election, you've got a brand that doesn't quite know itself. You've got a leader that has been sort of, brought back in to stem the bleeding. you've got things like the greatest moral challenge of our time being sidelined. How much can advertising change all of that?
Not much. I mean, really, that was a funny election because we started, obviously, the election campaign with Julia Gillard in charge of the party. So the type of ads we were developing were fairly broad Labor Party achievement ads, but, you know, we knew we were headed towards a God almighty defeat. And then when it changed, and when we were doing the Julia stuff, we, at the back of our minds, knew that a change was possible. So our negative campaign was done in the can, that if he wins, you lose, because it would have worked for either Kevin or Julia, because it was all about the consumer and what they would lose with an Abbott government. But once Kevin came in, that changed the nature of the campaign to be more presidential-like, because he was liked by the consumers because they'd never met him. There is a saying that goes, those who like Kevin have... No, what is it? Those who've met Kevin... No, those who've never... Kevin is liked by those who've never met... No, what is it? No, so someone summed it up beautifully. The only people who like Kevin have never met him, and everyone who has met him has never liked him. And I think that's fair.
Well, I guess, I mean, that kind of leads to the question of what a politician is like as a client. I mean, I guess you're used to dealing with the marketing department of a company. You still do.
Like, bizarrely, politicians themselves usually have not a great deal to do with the advertising campaign of an election. That is by the campaign director for... and it's usually the official leader of the party behind the scenes, sort of. So in the Labor Party, it's George Wright, who's the National Secretary, and under him he had a group of people. And for the Liberal Party, it's Brian Loughnane, and he puts together his own team. So the strategy and things like that are worked behind the scenes. But there's a lot of connections between them, because you need politicians to say things and do things and that. So, but sometimes it's really easy, and there's a real cohesion between basically the political arm of the party and the backroom of the party, and sometimes there is not as much cohesion, and that's when the political arm of the party decides to write their own ads while they're flying on aeroplanes and things like that, and that makes it less easy.
And does that correlate with success? Or?
Never.
Just checking. Yep, I thought that might be the answer.
Yes.
Well, staying on the Kevin Rudd plane, as long as we don't ask for the chicken. A new way was the slogan for 2013.
It wasn't out. Look, the amount of angst that goes into a positive slogan is ridiculous, because honestly, apart from a handful of positive slogans, you almost never remember them. You know, they're just boring. We had researched a few of them, and all of a sudden a new way appeared, and we thought, no, that's terrible. You can't have Kevin up there with a new way, but Kevin wanted it. So all of a sudden it started to go through research groups. It's like, people say they don't like negative politics, they want a new way. It's like, that's like asking people if they like puppies and kittens. The answer's, of course, yes, but it's utterly unhelpful, because what we knew was our best way of a good result was going after Tony Abbott. He was, even with Liberal Party voters, if you ask them the one thing that made them hesitant about voting for the Liberal Party, Tony Abbott came up. So the fact that we were going to go negative in that campaign, and we were going to go hard, early and strong with our negative campaign, we already knew. So to start the campaign saying, we're going to do things a new way, it was just like, oh man, we're going to look like idiots in a week. And of course we did. But I don't know if you noticed, is the new way quietly disappeared about a week and a half into the campaign, and a new slogan appeared, and I can't even remember it, and I wrote it. That's how memorable it was. But it wasn't on any of the material, but by then the slogan was the least of our worries.
You've worked on campaigns for both major parties.
No, I have worked on government advertising when the Liberal Party was in there. I have not, nor would I work on an election campaign.
You make an interesting point in the hard sell, that sometimes people who are quite partisan aren't the best people to have working on the campaign for that party.
Look, it's true, and you get a lot of people who volunteer to work on election campaigns in advertising, and they're usually these real little lefties, and they've got, Dee, we need to tell them that Tony Abbott's going to get rid of the carbon tax, and you sort of say, to the swinging voters in the Western Sydney seats, that's a plus. You have to explain to them that just because they believe something really firmly, and they're so ideological about it and so sweet and nice, it's like, doesn't matter. You have to be really pragmatic about it. And that's really, really hard. So you really do have to set aside your ideology a little bit to do it. So I've found that the really ideological people can be a little bit annoying to have around you in an election campaign. Sort of the ones who go, I really think we can win. Really? Can you read a poll? Because we can't.
Well, if you look at it from the other side, like, is it helpful to have... my experience is there's lots of cynics in advertising, but can it hurt you to have people who are sort of too cynical and don't kind of have the right enthusiasm for what they're doing?
Yeah, and that probably sums up the problems between the right and the left of the Labor Party, where you've got the real ideologues on one side, and then you've got those who are so pragmatic they're willing to sell their soul on the other, and it's sort of trying to find the middle ground. But I do think that people in advertising who've come from an advertising background are good in an election campaign, because you really start to look at things from a consumer point of view. Because when you're in politics, you just get absorbed by it, and everything becomes very political, and you lose sight of what's important. And that's why everyone bags focus groups. But they're actually really important, because you sit there and you listen to people who are struggling with the cost of living out in some suburb in the middle of nowhere, and they're actually the people you need on side. And if you're not listening to them, if all you're hearing is from people within the party, you will end up in all sorts of trouble.
You talk about focus group. There's a chapter on focus groups in the hard sell, which is, obviously very relevant because of the focus on focus groups, for want of a better term, in a lot of the writing about politics at the moment. I won't ask you to remember the quote, maybe I can find it for you, but the Henry Ford quote.
Yeah, it's great. He said, if I asked my consumers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And my point with that is, you shouldn't let focus groups lead your politics. Sometimes you need to show leadership and take people on that journey, but the 6 weeks before an election campaign is not the time to do that. You actually have to work with what is already out there. You can't create something out of nothing, and the best campaigns leverage existing moods and beliefs, and that's why focus groups are really important. They're terrible in general advertising because, as you would know, focus groups tend to reward mediocre ideas, because sometimes the ideas that are really magic once they're filmed wouldn't look like that if you showed people a storyboard and a script. So if you imagine, I use the example in my book of I don't know if you remember the Not Happy Jan ad. Now, if you imagine that on a script, it would be, woman notices her ad isn't in the paper. Her receptionist sees, or her secretary sees that, walks out to the car park, she opens the window and says, "Not happy, Jan." I mean, it would have probably bombed in research. So researchers always had a history of producing really mediocre ads, but in elections it's different. Because you actually never get the luxury of having them filmed by a great director with a big budget anyway. And normally, because the time is sometimes so tight between when you research the ad and when you have to get the damn thing on air, you do them almost as animatics. They're called, almost ready to go to air as is, and we try not to film anything once you're in an election campaign, because you have neither the time nor the budget to do it.
You talked a little bit before about, having that sense at the start of a campaign about what you're up against. In some ways, does it give you sort of a perverse sort of freedom if you kind of know that you can't win an election?
No, it's really depressing.
It is?
No, if you were probably one of the minor parties, it would, and you could just go out there and go hard and whatever. But no, because generally the people you still need to win over aren't the people who will be impressed by the really weird and wacky stuff anyway, so it is about solidifying your brand. But also, even if you know you can't win, the strategy for a respectable loss is exactly the same as a strategy for a win. It is to try to get as many votes as possible from swinging voters in marginal seats. So it doesn't change your strategy, except if it's a first-term government, you might go after the protest vote, because usually the voters remember why they've voted your lot out in the first place only a couple of years ago. So you're better off reminding them what they hate about this new mob rather than putting yourself up as an alternative. If the other mob have been in for a while, you sort of harness that mood for change. But, the basic strategies for either side just depend on how long the other side's been in for.
You give away a lot of secrets in this book. Was there any opposition from anybody whose secrets you were giving away?
Yeah. There were people in the Labor Party go, "Oh, you can't write that, you can't write that." But I'm not an idiot, so I checked with George Wright first. Would you mind if I wrote this? and he was fine, and most of the people in the party were fine about it, because there's nothing in there that the other side doesn't know. Really what it was, what I found was I was sitting in these focus groups and listening to people who just didn't understand the process of how advertising works in an election campaign. And I just thought, you know what, I bet if they kind of understood a little bit more about it, it would actually probably work in our favour. So it's written for people really who are not political wonks. Like anyone in politics who reads that will go, well, this is all common knowledge. There is nothing in there that's a huge secret. I mean, I
guess that's the trend of things like Gruen Transfer and Gruen Planet that you've been involved in as well. Do you find, do you think the landscape's changing by the fact that people are, more empowered and sort of understand the motivations behind what they're seeing?
Yeah, and I think it makes us work harder and smarter. You can't get away with the stuff they used to, with the big droney music and, this man will kill your children if you elect him, although we tried it with Tony Abbott and the school kid, didn't work. It does mean you have to be smarter and more honest about it. I don't think that's a bad thing. I want people to look at the ad and go, well, that doesn't make sense, because then it puts the onus on both sides to just be more truthful. And I'm completely partisan here, where I just think the truth works better on our side.
You're also very honest about your own work in this book, and you go into quite a lot of detail about the worst ad you ever made. In a sense, is this a really bad CV?
Well, no, because the worst ad I ever made was for Tony Abbott. So for me, that actually helps. It wasn't intentional though, I'll explain. What I was doing. Tony Abbott was coming up with a new thing for Centrelink, which was called Job Network, and the agency I was working for used to do a lot of work for it, and I pitched for it, and we won, and we made the first ad, and it was putting the right person in the right job, and it was jigsaw pieces. It was a nice looking ad. It was a $300,000 looking ad. Anyway, and Tony was really happy with it and rang up and said, look, yeah, great, we want a follow-up one. We want it to be a testimonial. Testimonials make me really nervous for a whole lot of reasons, because real people are shithouse at playing real people. They're terrible. It's why we hire actors. But it's like, okay, that's fine. We can do this. I'd just done a big campaign for the Commonwealth Bank using real people, so I thought, how hard can it be? Anyway, they found us this guy in West Australia, and it was all good. We spoke to him. He was really personable. Anyway, the night before the shoot, we get this panicked phone call from Tony Abbott's department saying, look, this guy's gone into receivership. We can't use him. But we've got this other guy in Melbourne. It's fine. Literally changed our flights and got down there. And I got on set, hadn't met the talent yet. And anyway, I sat there having my coffee, and he walked in and did his first line. I haven't said what his name is in the book, but I'll say it here. Well, he walked in, hi. My name is Gemmeling Pen, and this is my supermarket. I just thought, no. I thought, okay, there's nothing we can do about that name. But, we've got a lot of time to get his performance loosened up. 8 hours later, hi, my name's Gemmeling Pen, and this is my supermarket. I thought, shit. Anyway, so we got it in the editing suite, and we played around with it, and there was nothing we could do because we needed that front line, and every time he said his name, we'd all start giggling hysterically. We thought, we can't let this ad go to air. It would have got spoofed on every sort of show around. So we did the old magician's trick. If you give people something else to look at, they won't notice what's in front of them. So we graded the whole ad blue. And grading's when you play with a colour in an ad. Like every ad is not its actual colour. The whites are whiter, the brights are brighter. But we just sort of did this whole blue grade on it. And it worked. It changed it from being, just hilariously funny to just being, oh, God. But back then, before an ad went to air, it had to get approved by this group called the MCGC, which was a group of government ministers. So I was still in my 20s at the time, and I remember going there. I had to sit down, and there was this row of all of them opposite me, and their average age was dead. And I played the ad, and there was just this silence. Petro Giorgio just goes, why the fuck is the ad blue? And I just said, to give it a bit of a youthful edge.
Well, I'm guessing it got approved, though.
Yeah, well, they'd spend all the money they had to, but didn't get a job from them for a while.
Well, it was nice of you to be very honest about your kind of less successful moments as well as your successful moments. There's a great little sort of table in in the hard sell, which is a breakdown of all the campaign slogans used by the major Australian political parties 1949 to 2004. And I just wanted to try this little exercise with you.
I won't remember.
No, I'm not testing you. But you talk about the fact that political advertising is kind of different in that you're not trying to win awards, so you're not trying to kind of reinvent the wheel every time. So you can kind of, reuse, there's some ads that are kind of, reusing a Nixon ad for...
Oh, totally. And you would know from advertising, if an ad has been done, if you come up with an idea and it's been done before, you don't make the ad, because advertising creatives are far too driven by awards. I've got to win awards. And you can't win an award if an ad's been done before. But in politics, you search through, if you are doing an election campaign for a government that is going against a first-term government, you will look at every sort of election with similar parameters from the last 20 years in any English-speaking or non-English-speaking country and trawl through their ads, and you will steal anything you can that you think might work.
Well, I was just going to see if you thought there was any here that could be stolen. Well, It's Time. Could that be used again, or is it too
Bizarrely,
iconic?
It's Time was used by Menzies in 1949. It might have been 1949. That far beforehand. It's time
for a change.
It's time for a change,
yeah.
And I think It's Time was also used in Germany a couple of years later. So as a line itself, it wasn't, oh my God, this is an amazing slogan. What it did do was harness this mood for change that was out there, not just a mood for change of government, but in the early 70s, this just sort of mood for social change that was happening worldwide. So it just captured that beautifully, rather than itself being just this amazing slogan.
Well, I didn't realise this, but the Liberal Party in that same campaign used the line, "Not yet."
Yeah. Well, what you try to do when you come up with a slogan is work out how the other side will wargame it. The best, I think it was the Liberal Party in 1990. Their slogan was, "The answer is Liberal," to which Bob Hawke replied, "It must have been a bloody stupid question."
There's a lot of use of kind of names in a lot of these lines as well, which I guess would correlate to the popularity of the leader. So you've got Bob Hawke bringing Australia together. Do you think maybe Mark Latham and Labor taking pressure off families was not the right move?
I suspect it was more about Mark Latham just being a little bit cray-cray. But generally, slogans don't make a huge difference. But there was a Liberal Party slogan in, I think, 1983 that was considered so bad it's credited with helping them lose the election. It was, "We're not waiting for the world."
There's another one in here. 1987, Liberal Party of Australia, incentivation.
Oh yeah, that was a great one.
What does that mean?
Don't know. Well, there's some of the great ones that are in America. There was what was it? One of them was "Making your wet dreams come true,"
yeah.
which is actually not nearly as salacious as it sounds, because it was during the Prohibition and you had the dries and the wets, and this was a candidate from the wets.
Well, I think that could be reused to great
And then
effect.
there was another one. It was great. He was a senator, and his line was, "He does things," which is odd but kind of effective. But then about 10 years later, someone else used the line, but it put it in inverted commas and just made it seem weird. "He does things." It just changed the context entirely.
So on that same tip, we're in the middle of an election campaign in Victoria at the moment.
Really? Who can be the most boring? That seems to be the campaign.
The Dennis versus Dan / Daniel show that we're in. Labor's gone out with putting people first. How do you rate that one on the scale?
Meh, it's no worse. It's fine. It's if Labor Party's always been, if their brand, if you had to sort of say what the brand is, it's about not leaving people behind. So putting people first kind of fits in with Labor Party values.
You talk a lot about negative advertising in the book as well, and the fact that
everyone hates it,
but it works.
Yeah.
Labor have done, from my digging, like not a lot of negative advertising in the current campaign.
Depends where you are in the polls. They're ahead, literally. If you're the
so
more you are behind,
it
the harder
denotes
you go
confidence.
Totally.
Yeah. So reading that, you could say that they're feeling fairly bullish at the moment. Would they have them in the back pocket at the moment, in case? Because I know the headline, the front page of the Herald Sun today was something like it's on, or there's a
I think
nobody here's a Herald Sun reader. No. At the Wheeler Centre, really? I'm shocked. after the debate in Frankston last night. On the Liberal side, actually, I want to ask you about... Well, there's something I want to ask you about, but first I will say that Liberal just did some digging last night. Their Facebook cover pic says, "Stronger families, helping families, creating jobs." And then their website is ourplan.com.au, and their line seems to be "Our Plan, Securing Victoria's Future." And then there's an ad where Dennis Napthine delivers no less than 10 messages. There's little tick boxes. What do you think that says about their campaign?
They're in trouble. Look, what they should have is consistency of campaign, and they don't. The 10 points in an ad is not a bad idea. People don't take 10 points out of an ad, obviously. But if you're going to do an achievements ad, the point of putting 10 points in is no one will look too closely at any of them because you'll just get a sense of lots of achieving things. My guess is if you pulled those 10 things apart, they're probably not that strong, which is why they've stuck so many in there. Be my guess. And you've got to love a good tick. Things like securing Australia's future, I mean, they just mean nothing at all to the consumer yet. This is what it's about. It's about growth and securing our families for the... You just go, oh man, no.
Is that, I mean, something that means nothing though is probably, at least you can't take anything bad out of it? Is there kind of,
and this is,
like
this
a good
is
placeholder?
Politics, particularly in election campaigns, can be a little gutless like that. No one wants to actually sort of hang their head and say, let's do this. Probably because people did with lines like, we're not waiting for the world. And it backfired. So, you know, it does make people a little bit nervous.
The curious thing that I found last night while I was doing my digging is, and this kind of ties into, you know, you talk about how digital media has changed the nature of political advertising. And what I noticed is if you Google Labor Party Victoria, the first search result is an ad for a site called backwardsunderlabor.com.au. So that's the first result you get. And you click on that and it's basically a platform to show all the anti-Daniel Andrews ads that the Liberal Party have made. Nowhere on there does it say it's it says it's authorised by the Liberal Party State Director, but nowhere on it says the Liberal Party.
You don't stick your own logo on negative ads ever, but what you do online is you buy all your AdWords, your Google AdWords, so you make sure when people are searching for the other side that just negative stuff comes up. I mean, Coca-Cola does it. If you do Google Coca-Cola and cancer, you'll have 20 sites that come up how aspartame doesn't cause cancer. You know, that's what big companies do.
Labor haven't done it in Victoria.
You know, there are members of political parties who still think digital is pie in the sky stuff, and there's a lot of really good reasons why. Because for so many years, and you would know with advertising, you know, we'd have all these digital experts, and they'd come up with these social media campaigns that would get all these likes on Facebook, but not sell a damn product. So there was a lot of really good reasons to be cynical, but the fact is now you have to be in the digital space, and it's still... The same rules apply. You've got to engage people and with stuff that's relevant to them. But what we found online was, say, Facebook ads were notoriously terrible, which proves you can know every single thing about a person. But if you don't actually engage them, they're still not going to click on your ad. So the old rules of advertising about coming up with an idea that is interesting still apply, whether it's online or on TV. What
about the sort of fragmentation of the media? Does it... I guess is it sort of a opportunity and negative to have this really, really finely targeted media that you can do with social media, but then you don't have Hey It's Saturday on a Saturday night or 60 Minutes where you're going to hit everybody in one hit?
You would be surprised how many people still sit down and watch 2 hours of commercial TV a night. And the old interruption model, which is a TV ad, is still very effective for politics. Because surprisingly people don't want to look at election ads, so when they sit there and it's a Sunday night in front of the TV, they probably are going to, because it's there. Online, if a YouTube ad comes up and it's that little thing that says skip this ad, I mean, no one doesn't not press that. But now here's the trick is you don't actually, if you're marketing on YouTube, you don't have to pay for the ad if someone doesn't click on it. So if you can upload all your information into the first 3 seconds of the ad, you can actually get your message across without paying for it. Yeah,
I don't know how YouTube make money on that based on the fact that you pay for the amount of ads that get watched to the end. But anyway, gender's another issue that obviously comes up a lot around politics. You talk interestingly about selling to women and selling women candidates as well. I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise that we reach women voters or women sort of consumers in different ways. But you go into quite a bit of detail about, how different the approach can be. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, it always has been different, just because traditionally the policy areas that interested women more were things like health and education. For men, it's infrastructure, because I like to build stuff. Having said that, some of the first American ads, I think they were Nixon ads, that targeted women were quite good, because they also went into things like workers' conditions and pay and stuff like that. I get sick of the fact that every time you want to have a woman in an ad, it's got to be at a school or in a kitchen, because I don't like to spend time in either of those places. But the way we sell female candidates, use an example in the book, Kate Ellis was told when she was going up for pre-selection, she was told by her friends, look, you really need to cut your hair, wear flat shoes, think about wearing glasses, because there's this notion that ties prettiness in with incompetence. Which is just sort of extraordinary, and women had to play down their femaleness. I think that is starting to change. I think with the likes of... It was almost like to succeed you had to be a kind of a Maggie Thatcher kind of style woman. But I think with politicians like Kate Ellis, with Julie Bishop, with Anna Bligh, you've had women who are all incredibly different and still feel like they're being themselves and not sort of, being a woman in a man's world. But in terms of, selling to women, the Liberal Party was far better at it. The Conservative Party, they were the first ones to have female-friendly policies, and then they were rewarded, of course, with female votes. The Labor Party cottoned on in 1983 and for the first time brought in female policies and more female candidates, and then, of course, got more female votes. But, now we have a Minister for Women who's a bloke. And one woman in the Cabinet, because they promote on merit. So by sheer utter coincidence, white, middle-aged, private school-aged men happen to be more meritorious than women.
It's an amazing shock, I think.
Shock.
Yeah. We might go to some questions from the audience if anybody's got some.
Yeah, hi. Make 3 points in the Australian context of all of this. One is fragmentation. One is the adversariality of this whole system, and the other one is narrative. Now, fragmentation from an electoral point of view, if we're only talking about 375,000 votes in certain pockets of certain electorates that we can clearly identify, then all of the advertising and the way we aim for it and the way we localize ads and what have you, that obviously comes into the prospect of what it is that you are doing professionally, and I'd like some comment on that. Of course, we are very adverse in Australia. We've got them and us. It's always there. Them and us. We say yes, you say no. And this is the whole nature of the whole advertising thing as well. It's in the sport, it's in the judicial system, and it's in politics. And that's the British model. So some comment on that. And finally, what is absolutely wrong, not going back, to the narrative, all political parties, or the two major ones at least, I belong to one of them, is that the idea of very cleverly and perceptively going back to the narrative, as we did in 69 and 70, 71, 72, where we're actually trying to sell in a sort of evangelical sort of way a whole concept, a whole message. That's all gone by the board.
There's a lot to take in there.
Yes. Look. You are. You're right. We actually spend a lot of money targeting a very, very few people, and as the importance of digital changes, we probably might see less broadcast ads on TV because we can target those people more individually. But the reason there are so many negative ads on TV or in elections is because negative ads get people's attention. And swinging voters in marginal seats aren't swinging voters because they're deciding which party to vote for. They don't give a shit about politics. They really don't care. And the way to get their attention, and we know that negative ads get people's attention more than positive ads. If you go to a news site, I guarantee you click on the negative stories before the positive ones. We are hardwired to notice the bad stuff. And that's why negative ads work, because they also, and it's been proven with a lot of studies, they actually drive people to find out more information. Particularly in the age of the internet now, what we tend to do is we'll link the negative ads with a URL that gives information about it and drives people online. So negative ads are the only way that have been proven to change people's votes. Positive ads are really good at reinforcing people's positions. They are good at setting up an agenda for an election. They're not particularly good at getting people to change their votes. So that's that. In terms of the narrative, yeah, look, we try to build a narrative. The Labor Party, I think, has lost its way in the last 10 years, but you're right, and I think there is a lot of effort now towards building a cohesive narrative that starts to be communicated, hopefully over the next couple of years, not in a 6-week election campaign, because as I said before, you actually just can't do that. It's not possible.
Another question in the front here.
Dee, we're going to have another federal election in 2 years' time. Put your thinking caps on.
We've got to solve it here? God.
Yeah, in terms of...
We don't have any post-it notes.
Okay, what would you do if you were the campaign manager for the Liberal Party, and what would you do for the campaign manager for the Labor Party?
If I was the campaign manager for the Liberal Party right now, I'd be getting rid of hockey. I think they need a circuit breaker, and that way they can put all the blame there and see if they can sort of, reset the politics a little bit, because it's very rare for a government to be voted out after one term. Australians tend to give even bad governments a second go, but it is looking increasingly like that is possible. Having said that, I think, we're looking at the polls now going, woohoo, that they will tighten up before an election. In terms of the strategy, I actually can't go into it because I do work for the Labor Party, and I probably have a pretty good idea. I think the Labor Party needs to emphasise stability. If you look at all the things that worked against them in the last election, it would be good economic management needs to get resold again, and they were good economic managers and just never managed to sell that for a whole lot of reasons. I think one of them being that the GFC, the handling of the GFC, was seen a little bit as a Kevin achievement. So when he got booted out, no one wanted to talk about anything good Kevin had done, and then they needed to resell that during the election campaign, and you can't resell it 2 years later because the Liberal Party spent 2 years saying, oh, we're in an economic, mess, when we weren't. It's also really hard to tell people they've got it good. You'd sort of say to people, do you know what, you're paying mortgages are $3,000 a year less than they were this time. Interest rates are here. We've got one of the lowest debts in the world and that. But telling people they've got it good when people are struggling, and particularly when they're Labor voters who are struggling in the seats you need them to vote for you, and that's a really tricky way to do it. John Howard, I think, copped enormous flack when he said Australians have never had it so good. Very few politicians have ever been able to sell that message. Ronald Reagan did, though. In 1984, he did a fantastic ad that I've put in the book, which I can't remember how it goes. You'll have to get the book. But it's one of the few political ads that have said, hey, you guys have got it really good now.
Just one quick question. Can you hear?
Yeah, it's working.
Given the general perception, I think, that politics... the general perception that politics and the political process are very diminished, what is the role of advertising and selling this product that people really think needs to be fixed at the root level?
Look, advertising can't solve that problem, but I don't think it's as diminished as people think. I think there have certainly been some really big problems, and it goes back to this question earlier about the adversarial nature of our politics as well. I think most people on both sides of politics go into it for really good reasons, and even though I mightn't agree with the ideology of the other side, most of the people I've met on both sides actually really passionately believe in what they stand for, and I don't mind a good system that fights against each other, because I think it's a really strong, robust democracy, because ideology is worth fighting for. So I don't have a problem with that. I do think it's a matter of making sure messages from both sides are clear, and that it is about giving some kind of vision for the future rather than simply just putting the other guy down. But with any debate, you put your side, you put your argument up there, but you also pick holes in the other side, because that's what a debate is. And you've actually got, it's not a bad thing. I think it's actually a responsibility of both sides to show what you think is wrong with the other side. I don't think there is a problem with that.
The secrecy in putting forward policies, lack of detail in, say, infrastructure, the sort of things that we're thinking about in Victoria, and the lack of accountability afterwards are serious problems, and they are glossed over in the campaigns, and they are not followed up by the press, I agree with you. Advertising doesn't solve these problems.
Yeah.
But these are things that somehow the politicians should take on board when they're promoting their campaigns, and advertising can deliver that message better.
Look, I quite agree. I'm looking at what's happening in Victoria, and one's promising this, and one's like, "Oh, well, I'm doing that and this," and you look at it, you think you can't deliver that. So they're literally setting themselves up. And the good thing is the public know that, and they'll get punished for it. You know, there's no stronger campaign ad in an election than to be able to play your previous one and say, "Hey, we did this." And there's no worse ad than for your opponent to play your ad from the previous one and say, "Hey, they did none of this." So I think the public ultimately punishes, quite rightly, political parties who treat them like fools.
Are people's memories that long, though? I mean, it is such a kind of, you know, the attention span of the...
That's why we have ads to remind them.
Yeah, okay, sure. I've got another one down here.
You touched a little on this, but how much do you take into account or try to anticipate what the other side will do when you're designing your own campaign?
A lot. And it's a really weird thing you do, and it's called wargaming, and you literally design ads against your own party, and it's a really important process because it means you have a pretty good idea of what the other side will do. We didn't do it so much in the 2013 election because we were pretty sure they'd go at us on... debt, waste, mismanagement and leadership. We were right, so... Yep.
I suspect the answer is no to this, but do you think advertisers have any role to play to actually educate the public on political issues, or is it just about, you know, selling a product?
Well, no. Well, I personally do, and that's obviously why I wrote the book, because I do think that the more people understand the processes behind it, the better it is for everyone. But ultimately, when you're paid to advertise an election campaign, your first priority is to sell that party.
Got maybe time for one or two more.
Thank you. Oh, is that on? Working? Yeah. Dee, I realise you would have been too young to remember the famous Houston Keating GFC campaign that delivered a win for Labor, you know, winning an election that they weren't touted as being remotely...
I actually have that whole transcript of Houston and the cake in the book, the unlosable election.
Yeah, unlosable election,
Yes.
Exactly. I guess that's become a bit of a case study in some ways for the ad community. Is there anything that you think the Libs could have done to stem that flow of blood? And could I sneak a very quick one in quickly? Now that Daniel Andrews is reinventing himself as Dan...
Dan the man,
to avoid all these Andrew Daniels misunderstandings, etc. How much of a problem does that become when the leader suddenly changes tack like that?
I didn't like that because it is so obvious. You can see the strategy behind it, and that means, and if I can see it and everyone else can see it and it gets commented on, it's a bad strategy. There's a thing in advertising, your brief is showing, literally, and it feels a little desperate, and he didn't kind of need to, I don't think. But yeah, you shouldn't give your kids two first names.
And last question up the back here.
Yeah, hi. With the rise of social media, I think a lot of people's past is put on show, be it for better or worse, drunk photos and topless shots when you're at a bar or whatever. Mm-hmm. How does that play out?
Luke, stop going through my face. Go on.
How does that play out from a political point of view for the next generation of leaders? Is their profiles curated? Are they asked to shut down profiles? Are people not promoted into a position where they might be given a chance because of that reason?
Yeah, it's a good question. There was a state secretary laughing about it last year, going, in 10 years' time, I'm not going to have any candidates because everyone's, posted something. I reckon it's going to work the opposite. We've got these unrealistic expectations of what, politicians' lives should have been like before they entered politics, which is some, squeaky clean, ridiculous kind of perfect life. I think in a way it frees it up to get real people. It's like, well, you posted a selfie with your top off when you were 18, big deal. I think it'll actually be a good thing, I hope. Having said that, sometimes I look at what I put on Twitter and think, God, I could never go into politics.
Well, luckily you've written a book, so you probably don't need to go into politics. Dee Madigan, thank you so much. The book is called The Hard Sell.